All right. I think this is a lot easier to do in person. In 1905, an Austrian doctor described meconium ileus, and then the first description in the English literature of cystic fibrosis was in 1938 by Dorothy Anderson in New York. The term cystic fibrosis actually described the pathology of the pancreas, not the lung. And at that time, the disease was only recognized if you'd had a child who had cystic fibrosis who died and had classic autopsy findings and then found other children with similar symptoms. In 1948, there was a huge heat wave in New York City, and a number of children, several children, presented to Babies Hospital with hyponatremic dehydration. They had lost a terrific amount of salt, and that was when it was discovered that in cystic fibrosis you have a high sweat salt content, and that enabled the opportunity to diagnose the disease. Through the 1940s and 1950s, CF was quite devastating. You can see from Dorothy Anderson's descriptions in 1938 to Harry Schwachman's description in 1960, very little had changed. Harry Schwachman was actually one of my mentors in Boston, so I pick up from Harry. As was mentioned earlier, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation was not founded by physicians. It was founded by parents of children with cystic fibrosis, and it has been an incredibly effective, incredible organization that raised funds and enabled the scientific progress that has been made. In the early 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, the foundation created a CF Care Center network. So this was a system where centers were accredited as having expertise in cystic fibrosis, and they began to share data. So this shows the sort of improvements in care and survival from 1940 up to 2010. Pancreatic enzymes were introduced in the late 50s. The sweat test was developed. Antibiotics came in the post-war period and were used to treat cystic fibrosis. I started taking care of CF patients in 1978, so you can see where that is on this graph. And their average survival then was about 17 or 18 years of age. With further advances in airway clearance and what have you, the survival was able to improve to about 28 by 1989. And you can see subsequently the development of Pulmozyme, Toby, azithromycin, and hypertonic saline also had beneficial effects in life expectancy. This is a very interesting story in that heretofore defective proteins were identified, and then efforts were made to go back to the DNA and find out where that defective protein is stored on the DNA. In cystic fibrosis, it was the opposite. Samples were collected from individuals with cystic fibrosis, and from a DNA analysis, were able to show what was different. And then subsequently, the Cftr, the CF transmembrane regulator protein, was discovered. This is a protein that sits in the cell surface and allows the migration of chloride out of the cell, which is important in salt balance. Water follows the salt, and that enables secretions to be thin and easily cleared. Without the function of this protein, secretions become dehydrated and thick, and this causes an inflammatory reaction. In 1989, this landmark paper in Science, several papers, demonstrated the cystic fibrosis gene. Francis Collins was involved in that, and this was a note that a child sent to him, that this is the best day ever in my life. They found a gene for cystic fibrosis. Francis Collins is now the head of the NIH, and I gather he's retiring. So there are 5 classes of CFTR mutations. So the most severe mutations are one where there's either nonsense or a stop codon, they call it a stop codon, and you don't make protein. So if you don't make protein, you can't manipulate the protein. The most common problem is misfolding of the CF transmembrane regulator protein, and so it fails to reach the cell surface. The quality control mechanisms of the cell break down this protein because it's not right, and so it never makes it to the cell surface. And then there are other forms where the protein makes it to the cell surface, but it either fails to open or doesn't conduct salt chloride normally, or there's just not enough of it. So those are the different classes of mutations. The ones at the bottom tend to be milder, and the ones at the top are much more severe. So in order to affect this, you need to fold the molecule in a way that it will reach the cell surface, and then other molecules to open up the channel. For defects where the protein makes it to the cell surface but doesn't open, then you need molecules that help open up the channel. So actually, the Bill Gates Foundation was fundamental in this. What they basically did was develop what they call high throughput screening, where they strip mined organic chemistry. They made huge machines that tested every chemical they could find to see if any of them had effects on opening up the channel. And then they would get a few hits, and then they would try to manipulate the molecule to make it most effective, and then to design human studies to actually test these molecules. We are a member of the Therapeutics Development Network. This was developed throughout the country to have research infrastructure so that these molecules could be studied efficiently and quickly. So the first molecule was Cftr, and we participated in this study. This is a particular mutation called G551D, where you have a conductance problem. And with the introduction of Cftr, there was a significant improvement in lung function, significant improvement in weight, and actually the sweat chloride levels fell into the normal range. We actually had a woman who would drive, she would take a bus all the way from Sioux Falls to participate in this trial. And she barely got into the trial because her lung function was just at 40%, and it had to be 40% to be in the trial. And when she went on this drug, she came back, and her lung function was in the mid-50s, which she hadn't seen in decades. She said, "I don't understand it, Doc. I can't give you any sputum today. You know, I don't know what's wrong." She said, "My coworkers say, what's come over you? You used to just work and go home and cook your dinner and go to sleep. Now you're going out to nightclubs and you're going to the movies." And I mean, literally, she had a life. It was incredible. When I saw her lung function, I cried. I cried. I had to compose myself to go in the room and do the research study. This is one woman who took the molecule and tattooed it onto her foot and said, "Honor the gift." It made such an incredible improvement in her life. We also know that starting earlier is better. It's the best way to treat cystic fibrosis is to prevent disease rather than trying to treat it after the fact. And we know that that's definitely true with the lungs. So if you look at the distribution of different genotypes, you can see in the upper right-hand corner there's G551D, which only represents about 4.4% of the entire population. If you look at the F508, which is on the left side of the slide, you can see that 84.7% of the population has a copy of delta F508. So that's where the money is. So that's where the impetus was focused to try to improve the function of the delta F508. This is a defect in protein folding, so it needs a molecule to help fold it and then a molecule to help open up the channel. So we've discussed this. So we need a combination of a folder and a channel opener. So this was the first study, Cftr and Cftr, in patients who had 2 copies of delta F508, and there was a significant improvement in lung function. On the left side, you can see the blue is the treated patients, and the green are the placebo. And then after 24 weeks, the placebo group was given the drug, and that becomes the red dots. So there was a significant improvement, but this was more like a bunt single rather than a home run. It shows that the proof of concept that you can improve the function of the molecule, but the improvements were modest. Then other combinations of molecules were tried, and we participated in these studies as well. And so the combination of elexacaftor, tezacaftor, and ivacaftor, which you might know as Trikafta, was a real home run, an incredible improvement in lung function, and a substantial decrease in pulmonary exacerbations. And at the bottom, you can see quality of life evaluations. In the quality of life scale, 4 units is considered significant, and the improvement here was almost 20 units in quality of life. However, challenges remain. For some patients, the current CFTR modulator pipeline is not optimal. There is either a poor response, there can be poor tolerance, although that's generally not the big problem. The problem is the rare mutations that we don't understand, which may respond to therapies but may need a different approach. And particularly the problem is those with class 1 nonsense mutations where there's no protein, you have nothing to manipulate, or those with large deletions. So all patients could benefit from a genetic cure, and you probably have heard of advances in several rare diseases of doing CRISPR technology where you can actually reprogram the DNA. And that's probably where we're going to need to go for those patients with class 1 mutations where there's no protein. This is our own experience here at Children's, and each one of these bars represents a separate cystic fibrosis center. These are all the pediatric centers in the country. And this is a representation of lung function, the FEV1, the amount of gas you can get out of your lung in 1 second. And what's shocking is that almost all the centers now have normal lung function. 80 to 120% of predicted is normal lung function. And our median FEV1 for kids 6 to 12 is 104.2% of predicted, which is actually better than the population at large. And you can see we're at this, in 2020, we were number 10 in the country for lung outcomes. This is for our adolescents. The median was 97%. Once again, 80% or better being normal. And you can see in both of these graphs, let me go back, almost all the centers have normal lung function. And this is our result for nutrition, BMI percentile. So our patients have a median BMI at the 58th percentile. I mean, we're basically shooting to get over the 50th. I'm a little perplexed by some of these centers on the left of the graph, who have BMIs of 78% of predicted. I mean, they're actually making their patients obese. I don't think that's our goal. We may start having problems with coronary artery disease and type 2 diabetes if we overdo this. I'm very happy with where we are now. And this shows in the dark graph the progress we've made at our center, and the gray line is the nation as a whole for lung function in patients 6 years and older. And this goes from 2019 to 2021. And you can see over the last 3 years the incredible improvement nationally in lung function, and specifically in our center, again, over 100% are predicted. I think at this point in our center, we have over 170 patients, and I think there's only 2 patients who have abnormal lung function at this point. So in my career, we've gone from a life expectancy of junior high to early high school, and now who knows how long people are going to live. You better save for retirement, okay? Mass General is opening a geriatric cystic fibrosis clinic. So it's been quite a ride, actually. It's been an astonishing story, and it's been a privilege to be part of it. Thank you very much. Oh, this is one more slide. This is our hospitalizations year to date. So historically, you need to understand that our center continues to grow, but historically we used to have about 1 admission per the number of patients we had in the center. That didn't mean every patient was admitted. Some patients were admitted frequently, but when we had about 80 patients in the center, we were doing about 80 admissions a year. And now we have 170 patients, and what have we had? 12 admissions, 15 admissions, and only 2 of them were for pulmonary disease. No one on Trikafta has been admitted to the hospital. I mean, it's unbelievably dramatic. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that great